Welcome into Throwing Bones, the Inside Nebraska recruiting podcast. I am Greg Smith, senior recruiting analyst here at Inside Nebraska, and I'm thrilled to be joined by recruiting analyst Nate Clouse on this podcast today. It's our first one, the first recruiting podcast of the season of us kind of all being together. Nate, let's kick it off this way. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here, and always nice to get that first one in the books for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Like it's funny because you do these things where you talk all the time and you're always thinking about this stuff, but then the very first time that you got to put the podcast together, it's a little nerve-wracking, but not once you get rolling. So I'm excited for us to get going with this here and kind of see where kind of things go. We were talking about this a little bit before the pod started, is that it was such a fast and furious summer for Nebraska recruiting that we really haven't gotten like that crush of information here to start the season that you would normally have. Home opener coming up, like information is usually flying all over the place. We just have not had that this summer. Has that been kind of weird for you to observe?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it is. I think the whole cycle has been kind of unique where, people were kind of getting nervous heading into the summer. Because hey, what's going on with the class? How many? When are the commits really going to start going? And then all of a sudden, it just blew up in June, and then early July, and they got to the point where I think with the size that this class is going to be, it shouldn't be a complete shock, but it's different that we're not hearing about a ton of visitors for the home opener and just a ton of information in general. I think with where the class is at and the work that they've been able to do to get ahead is kind of put us in a little bit of a unique situation that maybe we really haven't seen under Frost so far since he's been in Nebraska.
Yeah, we've definitely seen the deal where they've made the kind of the big push at the end of a cycle. A couple of years ago, remember when they had that huge run towards the end of the recruiting class? That's happened a couple of times under Frost. But yeah, you're right. The early work, we have not quite seen that. And right now with the 2023 class, Nebraska sits at 14 commitments right now. With Cam Lenhart from IMG being the latest one. So let's go here first, Nate. I guess which guy, if you got to pick one guy, and I say, Nate, who's your favorite guy in this class right now? Who you got?
Well, I mean, it's hard for me. It's hard not to really like Amaria Miller for a multitude of reasons. Obviously, he's 6'2", 200, can run. He's just a playmaker. Was kind of handpicked by Mickey Joseph, former LSU commit. There's just there's an awful lot to like about him, and how he could potentially fit into this offense, especially with what we saw after the first game with Mark Whipple kind of airing it out there. There's a lot to like about Amaria Miller and his future at Nebraska.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm hoping that at the end of September, knock on wood, fingers crossed, I'm hoping to get down there to Louisiana and see him play in person. And I'm with you that it would be, I'm really looking forward to that if I could pull that off, because there is a lot to like there. And the thing that you mentioned is really interesting to me is that him being a handpicked guy by Mickey Joseph. I feel like Mickey is still in that realm with being his time at Nebraska, where when he handpicks a guy, you're like, okay, this must be a dude because he's got some high standards on the types of players that he really wants to go after.
Exactly. I mean, he's got the track record, right? He's developed some of the best, and we've all kind of seen how that's transpired. So it's easy to get kind of excited when you go, okay, well, Mickey knows what he's looking for. Is very familiar with LSU. Wanted Amaria Miller there. Yep. And now he's going to Nebraska. So that's, to me, that's a facet of that entire recruitment, or maybe of this class as a whole that is pretty unique and intriguing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the guy that I really like in this class, or like the best in this class, and it's tough because there are a few guys I think that could fit this bill. So narrowing down to one is difficult. But my default answer here has been someone that I feel like it gets forgotten a little bit in this class, and that's Creighton Prep offensive lineman Sam Sledge. Like, I feel like, to me, that there are a number of things about Sledge, who's about 6'4", 270, 280. Now he's got really quick feet. I've seen him, plenty of times here in person, just being out in Creighton Prep. I saw a season opener in person. Was also out there at Creighton Prep for a practice this summer where he told me something that I thought that it just kind of stuck with me. Is Nebraska basically has him pegged at being a center when he gets to Nebraska. He plays tackle because every offensive lineman that's good, it seems like, plays tackle for their high school, but he's going to transition to center. And he told me that he's really looking forward to that. He thinks that that is his actual best long-term position, and he's always wanted to be able to play that. But he knows that, as the guy on that offensive line, it's a really good offensive line, probably the best one in the state at Creighton Prep, that he's needed to play tackle. And I think that just his physical tools mixed with kind of being, a former player's son, he's got that mean streak. You can't go too long without talking about kind of how physically he plays and kind of with an edge that he plays with. I really think there's a lot to like about Sam Sledge, and he's a guy that I'm just fascinated to see how his future unfolds.
Yeah, no doubt. I would agree with you that he's a pretty intriguing prospect. And anytime you've got a guy that wants to play center, that is looking forward to being the center, and kind of maybe being the quarterback of the offensive line, so to speak, that has a pedigree where his dad played at, college football, played at Nebraska. I like the fact that he's a wrestler too.
Right.
So he's a hard-nosed guy that is not afraid to work hard, and has got that kind of that mental toughness, that mental discipline too, that you'd love to see out of someone who's going to play center.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think that he's a kid too, that, because I think gets a little bit overlooked just in the class, like I mentioned, but also kind of in the state with where we are with kind of when you look around at some of the talent that's in the state. And it's another great year for talent in the state of Nebraska. It's going to be another good one in 2024 as well. I just feel like he gets lost in the shuffle a little bit. Plus that tends to happen with offensive linemen anyway. Skill guys kind of tend to get all the glory, and then the offensive linemen get kind of pushed to the wayside. But I think that'll add an additional chip on his shoulder as if he needs that.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that, when you're talking about the Malachi Colemans and, even the Gatulas and Noonans. And I mean, I think you can make a case that maybe Benjamin Bramer is a little overlooked too, or maybe gets forgotten about or not talked about enough. But
totally
the in-state crop of talent, when you throw in Sledge and everybody else, I mean, that's a pretty nice group of guys right there.
Yeah, it ended up being a situation where I think that this is one of the rare years in the time I've been covering Nebraska recruiting, where there are so many in-state scholarship worthy guys that it just wasn't going to be possible for Nebraska to take them all. Like we have rarely seen that situation, and I know that Nebraska fans listening want to take all of them and keep those kids home, because you just hate to see the one that leaves. Biddy and Goy goes out to Iowa State and ends up being an all Big 12 type of player. That's going to sting, right? But it's really tough this year in particular to take all those kids. You've also got some position overlap there, and it lines up with some of the strengths of Nebraska's recruiting staff as well. There's just a lot going on there.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many years over the last 20 plus years where you maybe had one kind of no-brainer, Nebraska offer guy, early offer player. And then you had to really examine the film and project how's he gonna grow and develop once it gets in the program. And then you flip the script to the past few years, really
continue to grow and grow.
Yeah, I mean that the number of no-brainer offers is kind of to the point where you have to be a little bit more selective. You can't take them all, especially with some of the position overlap. So I don't envy Nebraska when there's so many really, really good players, because that makes some, for some difficult conversations in the recruiting office and between coaches.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things too that is also difficult about what's happening right now, and we've been asked this a ton. Nebraska took a loss in that first game against Northwestern. So I'll throw it to you on this. What do you think the impact is in the short term of that? What's happening with their recruiting, given where they are right now with the class?
Well, you can't sugarcoat it. I mean, that's it. That was recruiting wise, that was probably the worst thing that could have happened because, negative recruiting is very real. And I think that the way that transpired, the way the past few years have gone, it doesn't take much for certain other coaches or especially fan bases, whether they're being loud on social media or whatever, or even your own fan base being
Yeah,
negative on social
that's
media.
an underrated part of it.
Yeah, that's something that hurts, and that you're kind of trying to swim against the current there with some of that. So that hurts, and then losing that game, I don't know, with some guys that maybe weren't completely bought in, that were kind of wanting to see, okay, where's this heading? Obviously it wasn't a terrible loss in the box score, I guess. It's not like they got run out of Dublin or anything like that. But at the same time, does it plant any doubt with where the program's heading under Scott Frost? Does it make anybody kind of pump the brakes and say, well, I know they've got a limited amount of space left. Do I want to use one of my remaining official visits to go there? I don't know. But I mean, the bottom line is that it was, obviously not ideal the way that played out. Now you come out and you have a chance to kind of change the narrative a little bit this weekend with a home game and over the next couple weeks heading into a big matchup with Oklahoma. So the opportunity is still there for it to not kill you and kill any momentum that you had, but again, a little less than ideal there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that wait and see approach that a number of prospects have to be taking, because there can only be so many guys that Nebraska is really heavily in on right now because spots are so limited, right? And so if those guys are higher value targets and those are higher rated players, they're going to be taking a wait and see approach to say, okay, well now, whereas we maybe thought, hey, you guys have told us all off season how it's going to be different this year, and then you go out there and lose in Dublin. Now we all have, as prospects, have to rightfully so probably take a step back and say, okay, let's see what happens the next 2 weeks, and then we'll talk again around the Oklahoma game. I expect that one to be a really big visit weekend. Like if Nebraska, for all intents and purposes, they should be 2-1 when they head into that Oklahoma game. And then we'll see what kind of happens there. And then there should be a pretty big visit weekend for you to have, what really will be a huge opportunity to say, hey, we have corrected the things that happened and went wrong against Northwestern and Dublin, and we really are going in the direction that we thought we were. That'll be a huge opportunity. But before we get to that opportunity, Nebraska does have a home game this weekend, the home opener coming up this weekend against North Dakota, 2:30 kickoff, which makes it a pretty good one to get guys in. It can have some challenges depending on where guys are coming from, but it is a smaller visit list this weekend. And even though it's a home opener, I'm not completely shocked that we're looking at a situation where there are no official visits on the docket for this weekend. You got a handful of your local commitments coming in, and I'll kind of run through them here because you have Maverick Noonan, who's coming in for an unofficial, Sam Sledge, we talked about, Gunnar Katula, and then Jaden Doss, the wide receiver out of Missouri, who will actually be in the Kansas City area this coming weekend, next weekend, to see him play in person, which I'm pumped about. But then your two kind of uncommitted priority key targets are two junior college players. You have two defensive linemen from Iowa Western Community College that are coming in, and Terrio Thompson, who on this very YouTube page, we've got a visit preview with him. I spoke with him a couple of nights ago to kind of talk about what he's excited about to see with this visit. And then his teammate, Quintrell Jamison Travis, both guys, big 6'4", 260, 280-pound guys that are athletic and on that Reaver defensive line, which is always pumping out, it seems seems like Division I prospects. So I guess I want to start with those guys. Nate, I guess what did you think about kind of the list that's been put together so far, and were you surprised, I guess, that there were no official visits for this weekend?
Yeah, not totally surprised, to be honest with you. You look at the commitment list, where it's at, how many, how much more space is left. The large majority of the commits, have already taken their official visits. They took, a lot of those guys took them in the summertime, and which ultimately, led to their commitment. So, I wasn't totally shocked, especially with that marquee matchup coming in a few weeks against Oklahoma, where, if you got one shot to impress somebody, that's going to be an atmosphere where the recruits really feel what it's like on a game day at Memorial Stadium. Not to say that the home opener isn't always, a great atmosphere, or any other game for that matter. But if you got one shot to really impress some of these guys, I think that's the weekend that you kind of bank on, rather than the opening weekend here with North Dakota. So in that regard, it wasn't really a shock. That 2:30 kickoff does allow for a lot of the local, kind of surrounding border state recruits to make it in. It's always nice to have a handful of commitments mingling in with, with the other visitors. And like I said, the two guys from Iowa Western, the two junior college defensive linemen, that's probably, where the focus is going to be, where the big news, where we're going to want to know exactly how that visit went, if there's going to be an official coming down the road for those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that, that a lot of sometimes you don't have a situation where kids, they're coming in for visits like directly tied to the needs of the program that you could see immediately, because you've got to do a lot of forecasting, right, with who's coming in and where you need to be down the road. But in this case, there is no mystery, right? Like, we know that Nebraska's defensive line has been an issue. It showed itself to be a bit of an issue during the Northwestern game, and it's not really going away. So I think that the strategy to get those guys in here early for unofficial visits, where you still, because they're so close, you could have them come in for the unofficial. You don't have to use the official right away. And for that, I thought it was pretty smart, because maybe you do bring them back for the Oklahoma game, or it gets a little tricky too with junior college, because they play so many games on Saturday, that becomes an issue as well. But you can find another date that those guys can come in. But you can see that it really has a strong correlation with what's happening with the current team. And I also like that Nebraska is looking at the junior college route and exhausting that option before immediately thinking, let's go to the portal. I kind of like that as well.
Yeah. You and I both know you can't, live on the portal. You can't live on junior college guys either. Right. But I do love the fact that they are targeting players at Iowa Western, which is right down the road, very early on, getting those offers out there to these guys before everybody kind of follows suit, or before they really blow up, and getting them on campus. Like you said, depending on their schedule, there's limited opportunities for them to make any visits, right? Regardless of if that's, an hour down the road in Lincoln or not. So the ability to get those guys on campus, and maybe see Devin Drew, or, see somebody else from Iowa Western doing something on the field, or getting some playing time or whatever, is a big deal. I think that you got a position of need, you got those guys on campus, and it should lead to, another visit down the road, I would think. But there's no doubt that both those guys could help Nebraska and would look pretty good on the commitment list at some point in time.
Absolutely. You just need to continue to build up that rotation of defensive linemen if you're Nebraska. Like, I think if that first game taught us anything, it's that having that rotation, that 6-7 deep amount of guys on that defensive line is paramount. And we're going to see that as we continue to push into the season, that's going to be more and more important as guys get even more worn down, guys start to get dinged up and all of that. There's a lot to like about what those guys can bring to the table, and that Nebraska's going after after them, and we'll catch up with those guys after their visits as well, to see how those went. But that's going to do it for our first Throwing Bones Inside Nebraska Recruiting podcast. So Nate, thank you very much, man, for hopping on. It's been a blast. I can't wait to do it again next week.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Greg. We'll see you after this weekend.